based on some work that we at the Behavioural Architects have done over the last few years with the Greening Our Cities team at the New South Wales Department of Planning, Housing and Infrastructure. And provocatively maybe, why the word tree is the last thing you should say to someone if you want them to plant one, is what this is about. So the work is important because what we're dealing with here is a huge kind of climate issue. It's work that has a significant impact on the future of Sydney and the quality of life of people who live there and visit there, of course. And I like to think that it demonstrates how intelligently applied behavioural science can lead to behaviour change on the most important subject of sustainability. So in Greater Sydney, it's prone, particularly in the western parts of the city, to something called the urban heat island effect, which is essentially the effects on temperatures of human-built infrastructure. And it can be mitigated by green infrastructure. And that's what this project was about. So the goal was very much about creating a sustainable, livable, and cooler Greater Sydney, and making trees part of that solution in terms of green cover. With trees, of course, you get more shade, you get cleaner air, and beautiful places to live as well. What I'd like to do, if I may, I don't know if people know the comedian Ben Elton. He says it's a sort of sign of the failure of a comedian on stage when they seek audience participation. So not suggesting that I'm a comedian here, but I'd love to get a little bit of audience participation in the form of getting you to draw something. So I think everyone should have some paper in front of them. And if you wouldn't mind, just maybe turning it over maybe to a blank piece, picking up a pen, and just to take a moment to draw a tree. This is, of course, is one of those little experiments that you probably should never do until you know the result. But we'll come back to it in a moment. Thank you for being good sports over there. Thank you. I'll come back to these and ask you to all hold up and show each other what you've done. So the Premier at the time in New South Wales had a priority, which was to encourage the planting of 1 million trees on private property. That was it was part of 14 different Premier's priorities at the time. Just to put this into perspective, you can see here that 1 million fully grown trees planted together would cover an area that's equivalent to the whole of Sydney's lower North Shore. So you can see from Lane Cove in the west to Mossman in the east, from the Harbour Bridge in the south, way up to Roseville on the other side of Chatswood in the north. So it's a big area. All those fully grown trees would cover this space. Way back at the start of this, 2018, 0 trees had been planted and registered. Registration was a kind of key requirement of this project. And I suppose, this is kind of where, I'd love to invite you to kind of think about how you might sort of set about solving this problem. Because first, when someone comes along to you and says, can you help us, get people to plant more trees on private property? You go, yeah, that's great, and you start to have ideas. And, you think things like, maybe, we talk about the environmental benefits. Maybe we need to explain trees better. Maybe trees are sort of misunderstood in some way. And you start to have hypotheses. And then as you go through the process, you find that pretty much all of them are wrong. And you get to a point of thinking, oh my God, they've spent an awful lot of money with us and we don't have a solution. Now, I've kind of teed up right at the start that, the answer is kind of don't even mention trees. And I want to go some way to explaining why, this is a word you should not mention, to people, particularly if you want them to plant trees on private property. Before I do that, though, a little bit about our methodology. So this just represents that we probably had about 16 different stages of methodology in this project, and they included a series of stakeholder interviews up front with people in government and arborealists and so on. They were very important, those stakeholder interviews, not only for downloading information, I think, but just in that kind of process of consultation that can be so important to bring people along with you. We conducted, I'm tempted to call it a sort of community participatory methodology with what we call behavioural detectives, where we actually work with people in self-ethnographic ways and get them to help us see into their world, over the course of time. So we're getting context, we're getting, investigating their behaviour and getting them to investigate their own behaviour over time. And we also expanded our insights using a community sentiment survey as well as focus groups as well. Multiple methodologies going on. I think one of the things, I'm going to throw this out to anyone who might be interested in a sort of PhD topic as well, because it sort of struck me in my kind of years working in research that there is a tendency to always be, or there is a bias potentially amongst researchers to study the behavior of those people whose behavior we want to change and pay less attention to the people who are already doing what we'd like everyone else to do. Just anyone sort of considering some research, maybe you want to pick that one up. That could be an interesting topic. But I want to show you one of the videos that from our self-ethnographic study, our behavioural detective study, of someone who showed us their backyard. And it begins here. It's about a minute long. Just kind of go with this. This is someone who is, is a homemaker, is very dedicated to their home environment, and was selected in our study to be someone who wasn't so keen on planting trees on private property.
The tour begins of the backyard. Swimming pool, which is fantastic for me and the family.
Oh, Bo, sorry, can you turn that up a little bit more, please, and just go back to the, thank you.
The tour begins of the backyard. Swimming pool, which is fantastic for me and the family in summer. In great condition at the moment, love spending time out here with the kids. Walk down a little thing into my backyard, which is basically a resort oasis. Grasses, astroturf, tennis table sitting there, undercover awning where we spend plenty of time out here. Over there on the barbecue, dartboard up on the wall, little pool table over there, little golf putting green here, and then you get to the problem in my yard regarding trees. There's a bit of a bamboo tree that's felled in the backyard, and you walk further around and you could probably see all the debris and all the leaves and all the crap in the yard coming from the trees over next door, which a guy refuses to cut down and gets me very, very agitated. So hopefully that's a good tour, and turn that around so you can see myself. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Thank you.
All right, so what we're seeing here is someone who very proud of their sort of backyard environment. But if you're talking to that person about trees, pointing to the tree over his fence there, and and that awful neighbour who won't do anything about that tree as well. So you can imagine how this plays out. You have a conversation with someone like that about potentially planting a tree in their back garden. It's not going to go down very well. So, that's looking at the behaviour of someone whose behaviour we'd want to change. What then about someone who's already doing what we want other people to do? What can we learn from their behaviour?
Hi, I'm Rob Query, and welcome to our garden. This is our patio, which we use a lot. Sit out here and read, sit and look at the birds in the garden. So follow me into the garden. My wife's got a little herb garden here, which is we've had to look after by hand with the drought. But it's coming along a treat. We've got a little bush full of chilies. We've got the mint there that's going crazy. 2 weeks ago that was dead. There was nothing on it. So turn around and follow me. Now, this house we've been in for 22 years, and when we came, there was no garden. There wasn't a tree, not one tree in the yard. Have a look at this now. We've got loads of them. We love our trees. They're great for shade. They bring the birds, and they're just calming when you're sitting out on the patio. They look just beautiful. These were, we had to hand water them during the drought with a little watering can. My wife looks after all that. I filled the cans. She put the water on the plants, and we've managed to save most of them. It's looking pretty good, I think. Pretty good. In fact, the grass is growing so much, I'm going to have to go and water it. Okay? I hope you liked our garden.
All right, so there are some clues in what Rob said there. You might have picked some of those things up. But what we found, and I'm going to get you at this point, I just wonder if you've done the same here. When you talk to people about trees, they think of huge trees. They think of trees that tower over homes like our first guy. I wonder if you wouldn't mind just holding up your pictures of trees that you did, and it needs some marker pens here, but what kinds of trees have we drawn? Big ones. Big ones. Big ones. Yeah, nice. Big ones. Yeah, that's it. So I think what happens is when you use the word tree, something happens. Like we learn probably in early school days what a tree is from kind of picture books, and they tend to be big bushy things that grow in parks. So when you say to someone, would you want to plant a tree in your backyard? Goodness me, no. Why would I want to plant one of those big things in my backyard? Think of the leaves, think of the branches, and it just seems all too big. But what we learned, and that example from the second video of Rob that I showed you there, is that people may not plant trees, but if you start with the problems that they have in their gardens, things like a desire for more shade, a desire for more privacy, a desire for color, a desire for fragrance, a desire for more birds, and then you sort of say, as the very last thing, there's a tree for that, then you start to get people to be open to behavioral change. And it's not all there is, because there's quite a lot of complexity to identifying a tree and planting it and registering it online, as part of the requirement was. But you have to get that motivation in the first place. So if you start talking about trees, people close down, and what happens is something that's called a negative availability cascade, where one negative association triggers another, and you can't easily undo that. So it's actually very dangerous in a communication sense to use the word tree, because it triggers other negative associations in the context of planting in private property and back gardens. So here was the solution. So we developed the strategy, copy lines, suggestions for visuals, and this was done by the internal design team at the Department of Planning, Housing and Infrastructure. The emphasis that need more privacy in your home, plant one today. Want to wake up to bird song, plant one today. Plant what? Word tree isn't mentioned until a little bit later on in the campaign, when social norms began to be introduced. Join Greater Sydney in planting 1 million trees. It played out in other social media as well, where we identified different sorts of trees that you could plant, giving salience to fruit, giving salience to shade as well, but really avoiding mentioning the word tree. So what we saw was that tree registration at the end of 2021, when this campaign launched, tree registration increased significantly across Greater Sydney, and the green shaded area here shows the sudden rapid increase in registrations, which stopped being required in 2023. It shows the increase in registrations that occurred at the point of campaign launch. So the target was reached. So until the registration measurement was actually stopped, over 1 million trees were planted on private property as a result of this program of work. And we continue to work in this field as well. So we're measuring, through quantitative surveys what's going on. And what we're seeing is that whilst tree planting, has probably plateaued, and in fact, might be to do with the, in a sense, the people who had room to plant a tree have planted the tree that they were going to plant. But what we see that's equally important here is that the incidence of having a tree removed in the past 12 months has declined. And that was a measure taken in August of last year, wave 3 in 2024. And the average number of trees being removed reduced over that time as well. So there's a greater sensitivity and a greater kind of protection going on as far as trees are concerned. This work that we're doing with Greening Our Cities team has kind of moved into looking after street trees now, and which is another interesting piece of work that has the same sorts of requirements. And I kind of want to mention this because it's another sort of potential research bias that it calls out here, that something that worked once and worked well before is an easy thing to repeat again. So in working on getting people to plant and look after street trees, very, very tempting for us to be thinking about applying the same things. Let's not use the tree word when we're talking to people about street trees. We couldn't have been more wrong. Context changes everything. People don't want big trees in their back gardens, but they quite like them in the street outside their houses. What we found, and this I think is a fascinating thing, is that the issue for street trees is that councils think, based on the 4% of people who express negative complaints to councils, they think, the councils themselves think, we can't launch any of our initiatives to people because of all of this negative backlash that we got. Now, what we found was that most people love street trees. The issue that they have is that they think that, though everyone loves street trees, they think that most other people don't. It's called pluralistic ignorance. And so the idea here is that you actually promote the social norm of people loving street trees. That's the work that we're currently engaged in, which is part of this ongoing Greening Our City project. And just as a final thing before I have to wrap up, I think there's kind of 3 lessons just to point out from a research point of view here. Be willing to flex, be willing to pivot when you kind of get your results back in, and we thought, oh my God, how are we going to solve this problem? And it wasn't until we thought, people actually don't like trees, don't use the tree word, that we saw that. And that also is kind of encapsulated by this second thing here. What are we not seeing? I do think that's such a powerful question to be asking. It's so easy to focus only on the data you're collecting. And sometimes if you just ask yourself the question, what am I not seeing here? This sort of transformative, world kind of opens up to additional insights and ideas that otherwise you wouldn't have. And then the last point is that context changes your insights. Like the same set of insights that work on private property for tree planting actually don't work once you cross the fence and you're now looking at that same question, but on public land with regard to street trees. So thank you, everyone. I'm really happy to take some questions if there are any.
Thanks very much, Mike. You've mentioned a lot of the comms side of it, but I know that there was other parts of the marketing mix that were also used in conjunction with the council partner. Just wondering if you can elaborate a bit more on that as to what else was involved in the program beyond the comms.
Yeah. As I said, it's a complex behavioural journey, and there was certainly more to it than the communications campaign. There were partnerships with the likes of Bunnings. Also the department facilitated free trees. That's an important thing. It doesn't take account of really that people still have to pick them up, plant them, look after them, and all of those other things as well. And they have to want them as well. So there were those programs of work going on mostly to make, I think if you're kind of looking across the, ComB, for example, to give people opportunity and improve capability as well. But those are just a couple of the examples of things beyond just communication.
Thanks, Mike. Really enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you.
I'm wondering whether, do we have some sort of financial incentives for tree planting, making it more affordable and appealing? Do we have something in that space?
Only that there were a number of trees that were free to people who wanted to pick them up. There was no other financial incentive. Free in behavioral science has been shown to be a sort of disproportionately attractive kind of concept. But certainly, to my knowledge, that there were no other financial incentives as such.
And what is your perspective if we take it to the different level, like if the government introduces some tax rebates to make this project on a different level, will it work?
Sorry, I didn't quite hear the first part of your question.
In case if government helps us or introduces or announces some tax rebates for this plantation of trees, will it work? That was coming in my mind.
Sorry, I'm still not quite hearing.
To promote this plantation of trees,
Yep.
if government takes this initiative that they give some tax rebates to the families
Yeah.
who are ready to do
I
this
see.
tree
Yeah,
plantation,
yeah,
will
yeah.
it work? This was
Would it
coming in my
work?
mind.
It could. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's not something that we explored in our project, but I'm not going to say it won't work, but it could work.
Hello. Thank you so much. That was excellent. I really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
So I've got two kind of questions. They're not really. They're sort of more comments. But so my husband wants to cut down all our trees, and I don't want to let him cut them down. So do you have any advice for tree-based marital disputes? That's my first question.
Yeah.
And my second one is, how much do you love self-ethnography?
Yeah.
Which I assume is what you were showing there with those
Yeah.
videos. I mean, that was just fantastic, and
Yeah.
I love it, and I think it's a fantastic
Yeah.
methodology, and it seemed to work really well in that one. So, two kind of questions.
Thanks,
just
Kathy.
in
I'm
jest.
happy to answer both of those. I think in the first instance, I would just be kind of introducing new frames of reference and anchors to your husband. So he's not cutting down a tree. He's destroying the shade. He's destroying habitat. He's getting rid of colour. He's getting rid of privacy. And if you want me to go on, So I think that's that's one way to go, and also to kind of maybe sort of, like frame the actual behaviour in sort of murderous terms as well. That, something like that. And in terms of how much do I love self-ethnography, really love it. We call it behavioural detectives, and we prime people who participate in our studies by saying, we'd like you to help us see into your world and that of people around you, and we want you to be a behavioural detective for us. And people sort of go, oh, I think, we are fascinating subject matter for ourselves. People love looking into their own lives and thinking it's interesting, which it is, of course, to people like ourselves. And I think there's you get great participation with it, but also you get a range and a depth of insight that you can't get on purely recall-based methodologies like interviews and group discussions. So, we've seen that it's hard. One of the things that's hard about it is that a lot of people look at sample size and say, you only had 40 people in your ethnographic study, and I kind of go, well, we probably had about 5,000 behavioral insights, in terms of getting people's behavior every single day, getting them to comment on it while it's happening, as it's happening, without the distortion of memory biases. So it's harder work to get. You have to moderate it quite hard. But also the wealth of you know, contextual and less distorted data that behavioural data that you get is, yeah, that's how much I love it. Yeah. Thank you.
That was fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jane.
So when you pointed out that the powerful benefits for having a tree in your own garden
Yeah.
are different to how people see street trees, is this a hint that perhaps there's a street tree initiative? Were we trying to
definitely, yeah. No, so our kind of output from that work is being finalised at the moment, which is a playbook for councils in Sydney, you know, which is essentially how they can go about greater, you know, so it's thought starter communications of, you know, promoting the social norms around street trees and how to mitigate, you know, some of the kind of odd things that happen as well, that people, even though it's not on their land, they feel a degree of ownership of the tree that's just over the fence, more so than the one that's over the other side of your fence, for example. Like, that's more mine, that one there. So for good or ill, I can either water it or kind of do what I want to it. Is a little bit of one of those things that we have to be careful of. There's this sort of sense of ownership that kind of bleeds and sort of dissipates, you know, with distance. But so we have a playbook that we've developed that essentially is a tool for councils to use to ensure that street tree canopy is promoted and looked after as well. So it could be, if you have me back again next year, I could talk about it then in more detail.
Fabulous. And to what extent did the 1 million trees being planted contribute to the overall goal? It's a great question. I'm not able to give you the kind of figures on, you know, temperature changes or anything like that. You know, I can tell you that the department are incredibly happy, you know, with the amount of trees that have been planted. Their attention is really kind of shifting to not just trees planted in ground, but other forms of green infrastructure. You know, potted plants now count, you know, so that you're not excluding people who don't live in sort of, you know, ground dwellings, so to speak, but people who might live in vertical structures and other kinds of dwellings. So, yeah, I think, you know, whilst I can't give you the sort of, you know, climactic sort of data changes, you know, the sense of achievement in the campaign itself is very high. Fabulous, Mike. I think we're going to have to stop there unless there's anyone else with a burning question.
Happy to have a chat milling around.
Let's give them a round of applause. Wasn't it fabulous?
Thank you.
All right, so our last but our very much not least presenter now is Robin McCormack, who's going to talk about the ethics paradox.